Basically, this generation is more liberal, more tolerant, more Democrat-leaning than the one before. It's not just because they're young.
For another point of view, it's Hard News with Russell Brown and Wammo on Kiwi.
Time to gather up a few opinions from Russell Brown, the head honcho at publicaddress.net, also the Media 7 show, TVNZ7. Good morning to you, Russell.
Good morning.
Now, it's been a few weeks that the Times in England has been under paywall, behind a paywall where you have to go and pay for content. Of course, part of the big Rupert Murdoch empire. The big experiment, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and I think people have been, in the media industry, have been looking forward to seeing what happens here. Probably not with a lot of optimism, certainly in my case, because I recall the New Zealand Herald's premium content experiment, which didn't work. But Murdoch's past is one of basically taking a stand, taking risks, and seeking confrontation and gambling. And that's what he's done with this one. He's usually won, because he doesn't back down. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen here.
What are the stats currently saying about what's going on at the Times?
Well, that's pretty interesting, because The Guardian a few days ago ran a story saying that the Times had lost 2/3 of its audience since putting up its paywall, which would actually not be a bad result, because if you had 1/3 of your previous audience prepared to pay you, you might even make more than you were off advertising. But just overnight, a new story has popped up in The Guardian where they've actually gone to some of their own web people and said, could we have a look at these figures from this measurement company, Hitwise? And now it appears that the Times has lost 90% of its audience.
So behind that paywall, there's hardly anyone rattling around clicking on anything.
It's tumbleweeds.
Wow.
Which isn't entirely surprising, because when you look at the way that, most people use the web, if you're cruising around looking for a story and all of a sudden you see a page that says even you have to register to read this story, you'll go on and find a site where there's something to read. A site that says you have to pay £1 a week.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the fallacy, actually, of thinking that charging only a little is a good idea, because you get all the downside of basically putting a wall in people's way, and you don't get a really a very good payoff, basically.
But it is working for sub-publications, isn't it?
It's working, and has always worked for business publications. Murdoch now owns the Wall Street Journal, but even before he owned the Wall Street Journal was charging not for everything on its site, but in particular for its key information, for the data. And that's what business papers tend to have. They have a specialist audience who, apart from anything else, aren't actually paying for their own access. So,
And these days, more and more, the sort of general news organisations that have websites often rely on heavy customer interaction to glue people into the content. But I guess we're in a situation with the Times, if there's hardly anyone rattling around behind that paywall, there isn't any interaction going on.
No, there isn't. And we can't discuss things on that site with as many people, because there aren't as many people there.
Yeah.
We also can't say via Twitter or our blogs or by email, hey, read this story.
Because news is social now.
Yeah, absolutely. News is social. The way news is distributed is social. And when you look at The Guardian, which was a minor player, it's the liberal newspaper in Britain, minor player in the print game, in the hundreds of thousands, is now the second largest, or depending on how you count it, largest English language newspaper on the web. So it's got a global audience. It still hasn't worked out how to actually make any money from that, and I think the advertising industry needs to sort that out. But and that is because people have been able to say, hey, read this story in The Guardian. The moment you put a wall up and say, read the story in The Guardian, if you're a member, then it doesn't work anymore. And I think that's what's happening now at the Times. I'm sure this will distress even some Guardian journalists. I talked to Toby Manheim, Bill Manheim's son, who works at The Guardian now and runs the Commenters Free section. And he said that his fellow journalists were all looking at this with some interest, because The Guardian's losing a lot of money, as are other British newspapers.
And Russell, you make a good point in your blog yesterday about this, that if every newspaper was charging for content, we just wouldn't be able to afford to consume it all.
No, exactly, because we're in a world now where we do read 10, 20, 50 newspapers a week. We might only read one story in each, but we land on multiple editorial sites. And to argue, as Joanne Black did in The Listener, that we should be prepared to pay £2 a week because it's a good service, I'm not sure whether the Times is quite good enough to demand that, and B, if we were to pay £2 a week for every editorial site that we land on in a week, we're not going to be able to afford to pay the mortgage, frankly.
No.
So things have changed, and no one's readers aren't going to give up that choice. It's a wonderful feature of the modern age that we can read every British newspaper.
Yeah.
We can read all the major American newspapers.
And Russell, very very quickly, I do want to touch on the mining issue yesterday. A back down on Schedule 4, but apparently the government says a mandate to go mining in other, perhaps, conservation areas. Yeah,
you know what bugs me about this is that because of the ham-fisted way it's been done, and because when it was first announced, the numbers didn't add up and it was nonsense, and now they've backed down. In the course of this, we have not had a sensible discussion about mining, because I'm not against it per se. We use minerals, and we should look honestly at the numbers. The numbers may not look that good, but we still now don't have a sensible discussion about what's wise to do. Again, and you've seen the same thing, I have to say just briefly, with the 90-day trial thing. The evidence doesn't stack up, and the government hasn't gone and actually gotten solid evidence behind, to scrutinise its policies.
Yeah.
And it actually really bugs me. I think it's the big failing of this government is that John Key will say something and that becomes the truth, and no one bothers to go and find out whether it is.
Yeah. Indeed. Thanks very much, Russell.
Righto.
Cheers.
See ya.
Russell Brown at publicaddress.net, and also the Media 7 show, TVNZ.